and welcome back to the Wisdom of Odin. Today we're going to be talking about a subject that I think is going to help a lot of people, because today I want to talk about the relationship between Christianity and Norse paganism, specifically for people converting, for lack of a better term, so people transitioning from a Christian background to a pagan background, specifically a Norse pagan background. But there are a few notes before we dive too deep into this video. One, understand my history is specific to Christian Baptist Christianity, so Protestant Christianity here in the United States. Now, while I have become a little bit more wide-traveled and understand a little bit more about Catholicism, my knowledge about Catholicism and its rituals and what it does is fairly limited. So I will be speaking more from the perspective of someone growing up here in the United States with a Baptist background. But additionally, I do want to add that this is going to be something that can apply to any monotheistic religion. Of course, I don't know that much about Judaism. I know almost nothing about Islam, but I assume most of the information here is going to be able to transition quite well. Because my two main goals in this video are, one, to shed light on the difficulties of transitioning over from a monotheistic worldview over to a pagan worldview. And so I want to definitely shed some light on that, but also I want to kind of give people a place to start, because I understand that coming over from a Christian mindset, that monotheistic mindset, that it can be really hard to grasp paganism, to grasp a more animistic mindset. So these are all things we're going to be talking about in this video. Additionally, we're going to be talking about the things that may be similar between Christianity and Norse paganism. Now, when I say that, I mean, like, the holy book, the clergy, the rituals, the things that you may be looking for when you come to this religion from a Christian background or a monotheistic background. Those things that you may be longing for that you didn't realize that you were craving in a religion because you've been told that you need it. So, of course, this is not going to be a one-to-one translation because there is really no one-to-one relationship between Christianity and Norse paganism specifically, but we're going to try to give you the best answers here. Just also understand this is something that people have been trying to do with not great intentions throughout history, is compare paganism, heathenry, Norse paganism to Christianity and try to draw these comparisons. So they're not going to be one-to-one, but I do believe it's something that is going to help you out when you're getting started. So with all those disclaimers out of the way, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope it is helpful to you for people transitioning from Christianity over to Norse paganism. All right, so the first thing I want to talk about, and hopefully this will give you an idea of how this video is going to play out, is I want to talk about the holy book, because I think this is a go-to one for a lot of people. The moment you get into a religion, you're like, okay, where do I read more about it? And so in Christianity, that answer is so easy. It's like, well, we have the Bible. Look at that. Everything you need to know about this religion. Recently translated to English because we kept it from you for centuries, but here it is. And so, a lot of people look for that Bible equivalent when it comes to Norse paganism. Now, sadly, this answer does get pretty complicated, because the natural answer, people are like, oh, well, if the Bible is the holy book of Christianity, the Poetic and the Prose Edda are the holy books of Norse paganism, because they are the source material that we have of Nordic mythology. Now, again, that could be the simple answer I give you. It's like, oh, it's just the Poetic and Prose Edda, but that's not really the case, because these are more or less just stories of the past, and they were recorded by Christian people hundreds of years after the Viking Age ended and after the last pagans, died out within these regions, or at least went into hiding. And so these books really aren't a holy book. There's really not much in here to teach you about the religion today. While it can be stuff to help you learn and reference and build up your practice, they're not necessarily holy books. Now, within the Poetic Edda, there is the Havamal, and the Havamal is often considered the most religious work within the Poetic Edda, because it's actually advice from Odin to people. And so if you want to read the Havamal, I think that's going to give you the best idea, maybe give you advice on how to actually be a Norse pagan. But really, there are so many books within Norse paganism, Nordic mythology, history. You have the entire saga of the Icelanders to go through, which is an insanely long list of the stories of the Icelandic people, oftentimes containing little snippets of pagan information. You have the Heimskringla, which is the lives of the Nordic kings. You have the Saxo Grammaticus, is the history of the Danes, which has lots of information in it, and then various other works throughout history. There's actually a lot of books out there, but every single one of them is going to give you a little bit of information for the most part, and it's taken me years to go through the majority of these works, and I haven't even read all of them, especially the saga of the Icelanders. I've only really gone through what I've needed to in order to make these videos. And so when you're coming into this, the answer is complicated. There really is no one holy book, but I would definitely recommend starting with the Poetic and Prose Edda. In fact, I would even go as far to say that they are a necessary resource, at least to better your practice, to deepen your practice. But there is no holy book, truly. Understand that. The Havamal is is going to be a really good go-to place to learn more about the faith as it survives today. Now, while we're on the Havamal, I do want to talk a little bit about ethics and sins and things like that. So you have within Christianity the Ten Commandments, of course, and then confessing your love and belief in Jesus Christ in order to go to heaven. Ew, that felt weird saying for me. But I would guess that some people would have a question of whether or not anything like this exists within Norse paganism, as it was actually one of the first questions I ever was asked when getting into this faith. And so the answer is, again, complicated. But again, you can look at the Havamal, because the Havamal has a lot of guidelines to live by, but none of them are, so strict that it's like if you don't do this, you're going to rot in the bad place, which we'll be talking about here in a little bit. So there's nothing as strict as the Ten Commandments, or nothing as, defined as declaring your belief in Jesus Christ as your Savior. But, as I get smacked with the leaf. But if you actually look into the history, keeping an oath or keeping one's word is very important to the culture of the Viking Age people and beyond. And so swearing oaths and keeping your oaths and sticking to your character were very big to the people of this age. And that's oftentimes something people look at when getting into this faith today and practicing it, is keeping one's word and maintaining one's reputation. There's no stone tablets. That's the biggest thing here. There's no stone tablets that came down from a mountain saying how to be a pagan and how to keep good ethics. So I personally tend to look at the modern evolution of Scandinavian culture, in particular in Denmark with hygge. And so I talk about hygge quite a bit on my channel as well. And hygge is the Scandinavian idea of happiness and warmth and coziness and hospitality, friendship, family. And these are all things you'll see within the Havamal as well. And so these are the aspects I focus on as my code of ethics, or as the things that keep me honest and keep me honorable. Is I look at these concepts of hospitality, of friendship, of coziness, because these things do exist within modern Scandinavia, within the culture, and I believe they came from a pagan past. Of course, that's just my interpretation, and you'll learn very quickly getting into Norse pagan. There's many interpretations of this faith that survive today, and we ultimately will not know 100% what happened in the past. Now, I definitely want to get to the main thesis of this video, or at least what I see as the main thesis. And it's what I've already mentioned, is the difference between a monotheistic religion and what Norse paganism is and what majority of pagan religions are. And so within Christianity, it's monotheistic. It's this God above man, man above nature. And so it has, to me, a very dangerous relationship, as we're now seeing with our world today, as there is literally a company like digging into the earth over here, of man being above nature within the common world, within the common religion for so long, has destroyed our world little by little, because we believe that we own it. Now, I will say, for the Christians that weirdly watch this video, I do understand that there are some Christians out there who see themselves as the shepherd of the land, see themselves as the caretaker of God's creation. This is a healthy worldview, and I wish more Christians viewed the world in this way. My uncle is this way. My uncle is a devout Christian, but he never goes to church. He lives on his farm, and he takes care of animals, and he sees himself as a shepherd of God's creations. That's a much healthier worldview, and so I do wish more Christians viewed the world like this, but the reality of it is that's not how most Christians view the world and how most monotheistic religions view the world. Now, within paganism, this is when it gets complicated, because you have two different ideas here. Again, you have animism. True, pure animism is everything has a soul, everything has godliness, and everything has a relationship to one another because of this godliness. That means that this bridge, this tree, my sweater, the sky, everything has soul, everything has spirit to it, so therefore everything can be interacted with. But the problem with animism in its pure form, when it comes to paganism, is it kind of leaves out the importance of the deities. Because within Nordic paganism and Germanic paganism, the gods do play an important role, and I would say that even the gods as we know, Odin, Thor, Freya, these deities have more importance than just a tree. Now, there could be a balance to it, but still these deities play a very important role within the religions. And so I believe that Germanic and Nordic paganism are more of a hybrid between a polytheistic religion and an animistic religion. Because within polytheism, you have gods for certain things. Polytheism in its pure form is more or less the Greek belief system. In fact, the modern interpretation of Greek paganism is often called Hellenistic polytheism, because polytheism is that humans can reach out to gods of certain aspects of life. God of war, God of wisdom, God of love. Whereas in Germanic paganism, it's a little bit more ambiguous, because you have multiple deities of war, you have multiple deities of love, you have multiple deities of fertility, and so no one god fits into just one category, at least as they have survived today. So with that, I truly believe that Nordic paganism, Norse paganism, Germanic paganism, whatever you want to call it, is a combination of animistic ideas and polytheistic ideas. But keep in mind, these terms didn't exist in the past. Like, there wasn't a Germanic pagan running around fighting the Romans like, oh, you know, hail my animistic polytheistic gods, as he fought the Romans polytheistic. These concepts didn't exist then. They just practiced their religions. So these are modern terms that we have put on these religions, and so very rarely can we fit the religions, the pagan religions of the past in a box. But of course we do, because we're human. And so here we are, I'm saying right now, doing that, is that they're more akin to an animistic polytheistic relationship of the spirits around us, but also the gods that you can call to that are a little bit more real. So yeah, I hope that all makes sense. Because again, that's the thesis of this video, is talking about how you know, you have to move from that monotheistic belief system over to the polytheistic animistic belief system. Now, having said that, let's talk about gods a little bit, because within Christianity, Protestant Christianity, there is a lot of Jesus focus. I don't know if you went through this when you're growing up in a Protestant religion, but man, they talk about Jesus a lot, and I feel like they don't talk about God. Like, God's this kind of like omniscient other, but they talk about Jesus like all the time. You know, but Jesus really is only one part of the system, because when you look at Catholicism, you have the God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit, and so you have the Holy Trinity. And so Catholicism separates that a little bit, and then Catholicism, you actually have the saints as well, which is something completely abandoned by the majority of Protestant religions within the Reformation. And so saints really took on the roles of the pagan deities of the past. In fact, a lot of the saints that exist come from stories of the pagan deities. I mean, look at Saint Michael. Saint Michael literally is like a pagan hero. He fights dragons, but he was transitioned over to a Catholic belief system. And then you have Saint Bridget, I believe, you know, comes straight from Briege, the Celtic goddess. And so Catholicism very much so is an adopted form of paganism into a religious belief system of Christianity and monotheism. But then you look at Protestantism, and it's more true to monotheism, because they're, again, very focused on Jesus. Hopefully you're seeing this as a complicated subject, and again, one of the reasons I think it's so hard to transition over from Christianity to paganism. Because when you think about paganism, if your understanding of the religion coming into this video, you may know Odin, you may know Thor, you may know Freya, but past that, your knowledge may be a little lacking, because it can be hard to research some of these gods. Deities such as Loki, or Hel, or Tyr, or Heimdall, or Bragi, or Balder. There's a lot of gods within the Nordic belief system, and you do have the Aesir and the Vanir deities. You may know that as well coming into this. But again, hard lines are very difficult to talk about, and I don't believe they really exist within Norse paganism, at least my studies of the past, because hard lines don't really exist in culture and history. They're only put in place by people looking back. In particular, Nehelinia is a great example of this, a goddess I can't stop talking about, because Nehelinia was a goddess that was worshipped and venerated around modern-day Netherlands and around the North Sea. Now, she was a Germanic goddess that did have Roman veneration, but also some form of Celtic veneration. So she was a Germanic goddess that has absolutely no reference within the Poetic or the Prose Edda, no whispers within the Nordic atmosphere, within the Nordic world, the Scandinavian countries, but yet she was a Germanic goddess. And so if you start developing these hard lines within the belief system, within a polytheistic animistic belief system, you're gonna really struggle, because, and that's again a really hard thing to move over when coming from Christianity, because there are a few more hard lines. Jesus, God, basically it. Or God, the Son, the saints. That's basically it. And then you have Norse paganism, and it's like there's gods everywhere. There could be there's gods. I mean, there's definitely gods we have absolutely no knowledge of, that we've been lost to time. There's gods that we only know whispers of. And so developing hard lines within the gods you follow within Norse paganism can be a problem. Now, there are certain groups within Norse paganism and heathenry that have developed these hard lines, and that's up to you if you want to basically say, no, I'm only worshiping the Aesir gods or the Vanir gods, or Rokatru with, like, you know, the Jotun and, you know, the more primordial beings. But that's not really for me and not how I view the faith, because it's, again, more about the natural world, our interactions with that, and your personal explorations, and see what finds you along that journey as well. Now, to wrap up this section, you do have other important aspects as well. You do have the gods, of course, you have the spirits that exist around you, but something that is more prominent within pagan belief systems, specifically Norse paganism, is the ancestors. Ancestral veneration is a part of humanity. Every person on the planet, every people group and culture does some form of ancestral veneration, even the Christians, because that's something we can't escape as humans. You know, why do we bury our dead? Why do we give them, you know, rites when they die? Why do we give flowers at their graves or gifts? Why do we bury them in clothing? You know, all these things are part of religion and culture that all come together. And so it's no different within Norse paganism, but in fact I think it's more heightened, because when we start talking about holy places, you'll see that burial mounds were an important holy place as well for the people of the past. So simply, ancestral connection is a very important part of pagan practices today. They may not be deities, but they are still things that you can connect with when getting into Norse paganism. So I want to take a brief break in the middle of this video to say thank you so much if you made it this far, and again, I hope this video has been helpful to you, but I do want to have a moment of sponsorship here. So I don't have any sponsors for this channel besides the work I do in and outside the community and here on the channel, and so if you want to support this channel and what I'm doing, please think about going down below and supporting me on Patreon. Truly, it helps every single month to have so many people supporting this channel. I have a lot of great benefits for you there as well, but also recently I released a book, and around this time of the year it should be perfect because it's called A Yule Story. I see the Christians have decided to interrupt my sponsorship with their bells. So my book is called A Yule Story, and it's a simple story about a young boy trying to rediscover the magic of the winter season. And so it's not very long. It's meant for, you know, any audience really. I mean, obviously pagan, but really anyone can read it. So if you want to check out that book, please head down below. I have a link to it as well, and I really hope you enjoy my first book that I have ever written. Lastly, I'll add here, if you're interested in the pagan gatherings that the Fellowship of Northern Traditions, the community that was built from this channel, if you're interested in attending those gatherings, I have a link to our website down below as well. So thank you so much for whatever help you're able to provide for this channel, and I really hope you're able to make it to a pagan gathering one day, because they truly are a magical experience. And with that out of the way, let's return to this video on Christianity and Norse paganism. All right, now let's talk afterlife. Really, this conversation can be quite simple here, because the afterlife in Christianity, obviously, hopefully you would know if you're coming to this video, is heaven and hell. It's very simple. There is a fluffy, golden, good place and a very boily, hot, horrible, bad place. And that's it. There's no in-between. You know, Catholics do have a concept of purgatory, but other than that, it is heaven or hell. Fire and brimstone, or peace, love, and golden clouds with God. And I think that's a big thing that turns people away from Christianity, is this very stark difference in afterlife and overemphasis on the afterlife. Within Norse paganism, the emphasis is not on the afterlife. It's more about living your life now. However, there is concepts of the afterlife that are often put with these Christian concepts, and and I think Christianity, monotheistic religions, have made it really common to try to apply a good and a bad place to these situations with the afterlife. And quite frankly, the reality of it is within Norse paganism and our understanding of the religion, is there's really not a good or a bad place. Of course, you might think Valhalla with heaven, and then commonly hell, H-E-L, gets put with hell, H-E-L-L. And you see varying concepts of hell, a frozen wasteland or another fiery and brimstone place, a horrible place versus a not so bad place. But hell, from what we know from the Prose Edda, mostly is a place that the sick and old go. And so these concepts of hell, H-E-L, and H-E-L-L being the same are kind of hard to believe. Now, it is also said that Nidhogger will eat the oath breakers and the adulterers, I think, and the kinslayers. So there maybe is a bad place for kinslayers, adulterers, and oath breakers. But again, these are very lightly mentioned. In fact, there are actually several afterlives that are very lightly mentioned. If you actually dig into the source material, you'll have Aegir's Hall, Thor's Hall, Odin's Hall, Freya's Hall, and then Helheim as well, and a few others. So there's actually many concepts of the afterlife. I do have a few videos talking about this more exclusively if you're interested in checking them out. But the simple answer is that there is no simple answer, that Valhalla is not heaven and hell, H-E-L, is not H-E-L-L. They're not one-to-one in any way, actually. And so when it comes to the faith as it survives today in Norse paganism, what we understand of it, it's more about living life now and enjoying life as you have it. Enjoying the beautiful nature, enjoying beautiful days, enjoying your friends and your family. And this is something that I think a lot of people really like about Norse paganism, is this focus on life now, because in Christianity there is this overemphasis on the life after this one, and we need to be more concerned about this one. All right, now let's talk about clergy. This was a topic I thought about leaving out of this video, simply because I don't know if something that people really search for, but I wanted to include it anyways, or at least talk about it briefly. So within Christianity, you're used to going to a minister, a pastor, or a father in order to get your information and to seek help. Or, in my church, when I was younger, it was like the youth pastor that was always like some hip dude that skateboarded and like would show up weirdly at your cafeteria and try to get you to play video games and talk about God. So you typically within Christianity have your go-to person. You have that person that you talk about your religious problems with, and your pastor kind of becomes, or your religious counselor becomes your counselor, becomes your advisor, and your leader within the church. And so what is that equivalent within Norse paganism, or does it have an equivalent? And the answer is yes, but we don't know that much about it. And so there are priests within historical paganism within the Germanic and Nordic regions, but we just simply do not know that much about them. The Romans do reference the fact that the Germanic people did have priests, but we don't know anything about them. We know the Celtic people had druids, and we know about 2 paragraphs worth of information from Julius Caesar about the druids, and the druids were in a very important and integrated part of society that lasted for hundreds of years. And so druids were incredibly important to the Celtic people, and yet we know so little about them because they were just so happened to be very into not writing things down. Now, when it comes to Scandinavia, our knowledge is just as little, and there is a slight distinction. So within Iceland, where most of our written source material come from, we do have the concept of a Gothi, which was both a community leader, a village leader, as well as the religious leader within Icelandic society, but their role was, from what I could tell, a little bit more political than it was religious. And our knowledge of them is fairly light, but it is a term that you'll see referenced here in the modern age, particularly within Asatru organizations. We'll use the term Gothi. If you look at the Icelandic Asatru that exists today, they do have a Gothi, and I believe it's a Githya for a female priest. So this is a concept some people use. So yeah, we might know the term Gothi. Now, what about a shaman? So we know druids kind of fulfilled that shamanic role a little bit. We know that shamans existed within the Sami people of northern Scandinavia. We know the Mongolian people and the Siberian people had shamans, but what about the Germanic people? What about the Nordic? We don't really know. Now, there is the concept of a vulva, which I'm not even sure myself where the origins of vulva come from, if it was in written source material or if it's just a term that we've given the vulva. But there's also the practice of seidr, which kind of wraps into vulva. It's very similar to shamanism, but not quite. There's a lot of reconstruction go around that. So yes, simply there are religious leaders, but I really want to emphasize here that you don't need one. Now, I do think a lot of people are still going to seek out a religious leader because it can be hard to practice this faith today, and there's nothing wrong with that. Because again, we do have historical evidence that priest and a priest class or religious leaders did exist in the historical past. And maybe the best way to put this is Christianity has a long history of leadership, of hierarchy, of the governing body, and so they have over 1,000 years, 2,000 years of religious history to go off of, whereas the modern pagan concept as it survives today really has only been around for the last 200 years. While we may be based on religious practices of thousands of years ago, the structure and the order and the traditions that have been passed on are something that are very new. So the identity and the way leadership works within global paganism is going to be different, and it's going to be something that is still evolving and something we're all still learning today. So yes, in closing here, is there religious leaders? Is there a priest class? Yes, it's just complicated like everything else. All right, let's talk sacred places. So again, this is going to be slightly different based on Protestant Christianity versus Catholic Christianity. Protestant Christianity pretty much is exclusive to churches, to places of worship, Whereas in Catholicism, there are different places that you can go to, different pilgrimages that you can go to, and even places in nature that are sacred to the Catholic people. So again, Catholicism is a little bit more pagan. In fact, it's quite pagan in a lot of areas and circumstances, because we're going to see very similar things within the pagan belief system. So again, of course, in Protestant Christianity, you have the church. That is the pillar. That is the place of worship. That is it. Almost exclusively. Catholicism, you have the cathedral, then some sacred groves, some sacred places. But within paganism, it's pretty much all sacred groves and sacred places with some temples sprinkled in. Now, actually, let me show you why I chose this spot to talk. This is a giant oak tree. Look how big this thing is. This thing is huge. It's over 400 years old. And so something like this would have definitely been a sacred site to the people of the past, in particular the Celtic people, because the Druids, one of the things we do know is they held oak trees sacred. Now, the Germanic people and the Scandinavian people also held oak trees as sacred because they were a sign and symbol of Thor. And so you see a lot of sacred oak trees that still exist actually in Germany today. And of course, the most famous of these trees or pillars was Irminsul, which was taken down by Charlemagne historically. And so the sacred pillar, the sacred tree, these are very important concepts to the Germanic people especially, but even the Scandinavian people. Now, in my research, I have never found any reference to a temple per se of the Germanic people. They mostly had holy sites and sacred places and sacred trees, sacred groves. But there is reference to temples existing within Scandinavia, and the most famous of these being Uppsala, which still technically exists today, but there's a church on top of it, and there has been a lot of religious revival going on there with Norse Paganism. And so we do know that temples existed to some extent in Scandinavia, but sacred groves were still important. Now, one thing that you may not think of a lot when it comes to Norse paganism is stone circles. There's actually quite a few stone circles that exist and other stone monuments that exist within Scandinavia, and of course there's plenty within Germany as well, and of course all over the Celtic region. And so stone circles, monument building, this was also an important concept. I mean, look at runestones. Now, runestones themselves were not always religious. In fact, very few of them are very pagan. And many of them are very Christian, but there's still a cultural thing of a big stone that was carved and would have been seen as important or sacred, or at very least a memorial to someone or something. So what does this mean for you today? Well, one, it means it's going to be hard, because if you want to be a Christian, my gosh, you can go to basically every block of every city in America at the very least and see a church. And so you can walk in anywhere and say, you know what, I want to be a Christian. But you can't do that in Norse paganism. There are very few places around the world you can go to. And actually, one of the first things I showed you here where I filmed is an amphitheater outside with big stones on it. Of course, this wasn't made in a pagan mindset, but it's still something that you can use today to be seen as a sacred place. Same with this here, this old tree, this ancient oak tree. This is a sacred grove. Use this as a sacred grove. Find old oak trees. Practice your religion here. Come to these places. Come to nature. Come to make your own sacred groves. So just because we don't have a church on every street corner, we can have a tree on every street corner, kind of, maybe. But nature is the sacred space. And so, you may be jealous of the Christians and all their churches, but they should be jealous of us and all of our nature. So getting into this faith, I know it can be a little disheartening to see that there's really not much out there as far as pagan sites, pagan temples. And it takes a lot of work. The Fellowship of Northern Traditions that is tied to this channel, we're trying it. We're going to buy our own land. We're going to build a hall. But this is a multiple year, thousands of dollar investment. And so it's something that is very difficult and something I'm pretty sure we're going to achieve, but it's going to take a long time, and we hope that you visit it one day. And maybe in the future you're watching this video and you can come visit it. But for now, sacred groves, sacred spaces, places in nature are going to be the best places for you to go when getting into Norse paganism and looking for a place to worship the gods. All right, so you know where to celebrate paganism, where to practice paganism, go to your sacred groves, but when do you do it? Because you may be wondering when coming into this from Christianity, do we have holy days, or are there certain days of the week we have to do certain things? Because in Christianity, every Sunday you're supposed to go to worship and venerate God, you're supposed to hold the Sabbath as holy, as it tells you in the Ten Commandments. So what about Norse paganism? Well, just like everything else in this video, it's complicated. But let's talk about holidays here. So, oh gosh, this is complicated. So, let's start with Christmas and Easter, because this is what most Christians venerate today, at least Protestant Christians. So when it comes to these, Christmas, you have Yule. Easter, you have Ostara. not bad. That's an easy place to start. But when we start looking into Catholicism, you have much more regional holidays and things that are held sacred, and particular saints' days, like St. Patrick's Day, you know, and other Catholic holidays I have no knowledge of. But when traveling across Europe, there was always some kind of Catholic holiday happening, and every place I went, it seems like every other day they have a Catholic holiday. And this is, to me, because all these places have regional celebrations that they hold, and every place in the world has slightly different holidays. And so when locking down the Norse pagan holidays, it can be really hard. And there also is a lot of debate on whether or not what you do, what you follow. And so know that no matter what I tell you, there's going to be a million different answers out there for what holidays you should hold sacred and when to hold them. And that mostly comes from the difference between the solar cycle and the lunar cycle, because the Germanic people and the Nordic people followed a lunar calendar versus a solar calendar that we base our lives on today. And so it can be really hard to follow a lunar calendar when nothing else in the world follows a lunar calendar. And quite frankly, I don't know how to follow a lunar calendar, but there's many reconstructed versions out there, but none of them are going to be 100% historically accurate, because we just simply can't have a historically accurate lunar calendar to the past, because we just don't know everything of the past and we have scattered information. And so a solar calendar is going to be more applied to your daily life now, and it's easier to get time off work, it's easier to follow because all our calendars are based on it. And so I personally follow the solar calendar when it comes to practicing this religion today. Now, what does that actually mean? So as you can see here, I actually have a sun wheel on my chest. So you have the solstices and the equinoxes, when the sun is at its extreme points of the year, that actually determines the seasonal changes wherever you live. And again, that's going to change wherever you live, which is why this is such a hard concept to talk about. Because if you live in South Africa, your entire concept of the seasons is the polar opposite of me here in Kentucky. And so it's going to be different for every single one of you, which is one of the reasons this is complicated. But typically, you have the solstices and the equinoxes that you can hold your celebrations at. You can have specific rituals, and I think this is a great place to start. And typically within the Fellowship of Northern Traditions, we have our Yule around the winter solstice and a little bit beyond. We have our midsummer gatherings around the summer solstice. And so, yeah. Oh my gosh, this is so hard to talk about, because now I mentioned midsummer. I'm like, oh yeah, well, midsummer. It's a modern surviving Scandinavian holiday that still exists from the pagan past. And so you have midsummer that typically takes place around the summer solstice, which has modern things that happen all the time. Every year there's midsummer celebrations. And so a lot of the things that have become cultural were originally pagan. And so yes, you can celebrate midsummer. And then you have the Celtic holidays, the Celtic fire festivals that a lot of people rope into their pagan practices now. And that's all because of Wicca, and Wicca took the wheel of the year. They put the solstices and the equinoxes on there, and they put the Celtic fire festivals on there as well. So a lot of people follow that. It's complicated. So when it comes to a simple answer on the holidays, I sadly don't have one for you. I do have videos trying to describe this and explain it in better, but I think, to me, the best advice I can give you, and people will say this is not 100% accurate, it's whatever is going to work best for you, and that's going to be the thing to focus on here. So I recommend holding the solstices and equinoxes sacred, because it's easy to do and move around our current lives living by the solar calendar, and then add on from there. Add on the very specific, like house bloat, DC bloat, alpha bloat. That's when you can start adding in those more nuanced holidays. So start simple, don't let it overwhelm you, because it can overwhelm you so quickly. So start simple with the holidays, solar holidays, great place to start, and work your way from there. As always, my advice, no matter what, is despite all the complicatedness of following this religion and all the nuances and challenges, the most important part of it is being connected to nature, the wind, the ancient trees, and all of this, and taking time outside to be thankful for the life you're living, and just being a part of this beautiful world, and then finding the guidance of the gods when it finds you. So it really is quite beautiful and simple deep down, but I know it can be complicated to follow this religion today, to get into it, which is why I wanted to make this video. Now, the last thing I actually want to talk about in this video is the actual performance of religion in the sense of Christianity and Norse paganism, or paganism in general. And so within Christianity, you look back at the times that you had in church, what did you usually do? You came in, you sang, were lectured to about Christianity and the Bible, and then typically maybe there was time for prayer, and then communion of eating the bread of Christ and the wine and the blood and whatnot. So you have singing, sermons, and ritual. And even within the Baptist church I was raised in, and then the few Presbyterian churches I went to, communion was not something that was very common. In fact, it was very rare to actually do the communion aspect. And I think this was because Protestantism was removing itself from Catholicism, and so the removal of ritual was really big in the Protestant Reformation. And from my understanding of Catholicism, ritual has much more of an important aspect. The few times I've been to a Catholic service, I know there was lots of kneeling. You would walk in, you would kneel, they would do other things, then you would kneel, you had to say certain things, and of course they still have the Latin, verses, the Latin, sermons that they actually read. And so there is a little bit more ritual to Catholicism, and after my travels abroad, I have seen that a lot of the rituals and small little cultural things about Catholicism came from the pagan source material. And so it's one of those things, ritual definitely seems to be rooted in paganism. And so when looking at Protestantism, looking into Baptist Christianity, really any Protestant form of Christianity, ritual is not important. Whereas in paganism, whereas in Norse paganism, ritual is very important. So in Christianity, especially Protestant Christianity, you have much more emphasis on the sermon, on the lecture, and maybe the song, whereas in paganism, much more emphasis on the actual performance of ritual and what ritual can do. Now, as far as the singing aspect, I talked about this very recently. While we may have a cringe level to Christian music, it's horrible most of the time, especially modern Christian music, but that doesn't change the fact that music is important to religion, especially to paganism. Ecstatic dance, singing, just humming, playing music, these were all ways to honor the gods, and there's still ways to honor the gods now. And so I really want to encourage people to sing more when it comes to this religion today. And so just because you didn't like music and you didn't like the music of Christian services, especially Protestant ones, doesn't mean you should completely give up on religious music. Look into bands such as Heilung or Wardruna, and that's what you can really see a heavy emphasis on, Nordic paganism and what music can be when it comes to the faith today. Now, going back to this difference of sermon versus ritual, a sermon, in Christianity is mostly what you see in Protestant Christianity. It's sitting there in a seat and someone telling you something about the Bible or something about the language or history or, having a message for the day. That's a sermon. You sit there, you listen, and hopefully learn something. Now, you may think, well, that's not in paganism today, but what are you doing right now? You're sitting there watching me talk about paganism, you're watching me talk about religion, and oftentimes I talk about the history, the mythology, and other subjects, and it's just me talking to you so you can learn more. So while we may not, prefer the term of a sermon or, the stuffiness of a church, the idea of talking about the religion, talking about concepts within the religion still exists, and they've just taken on this new life, particularly here on YouTube and other social media platforms. Now, personally, at our gatherings at the Fellowship of Northern Traditions, we don't have anything like this. There's no sermons, there's no us standing there and just being like, here's the poetic Edda. Now, I have seen pagan groups that do that, and if you actually look into the history of paganism coming back together, there was a lot more emphasis on that. In fact, in the early Germanic days of the Germanic movements that came out of the 1800s, there was a lot of churchy type stuff of people sitting there and getting lectured to. And so when really looking at historical, ancient paganism, there was such an emphasis on ritual. So to close out on this, while you may not think there's a connection here as far as the actual practice of, Christianity versus Norse paganism, the core principles are actually still there. Singing, lectures, and ritual. The emphasis may be different in Christianity, the more emphasis on lectures, but the emphasis on ritual is very important in paganism. So if you're stepping into your pagan shoes, know that ritual is a very important aspect of the religion today and the religion in the past. And so I really hope you're able to step into some small offerings, giving an offering to the gods, start working into ritual practice. All things I can't cover in just one video. I have an entire series of videos on this channel about ritual, and of course the gathering videos if you want to watch the rituals we performed with the Fellowship of Northern Traditions. Alright, you've made it to the end of the video. Thank you so very much, and again, I hope it's been helpful to you. I hope this gives you a place to start if you're coming to Norse paganism from a Christian background or a monotheistic background. So once again, I just want to reiterate, it's not a one-to-one transition. It definitely is not. That worldview of transitioning between a monotheistic worldview over to a pagan, polytheistic, animist worldview is very difficult, and it's something that I think a lot of people struggle with, and they never knew how to put it into words. So I hope that alone has really helped you in this video. But if you see all these names coming down here, these are the amazing people that support me on Patreon and ensure I'm able to do this full time. So thank you to everyone heading down this list. You all are absolutely amazing. And if you're interested in getting your name on this list, please head down below to Patreon. Otherwise, thank you so very much once again. And until the hall, Skål.